Alex here on, let's call this Frankie family. I don't know what I'm going to call this. You'll see it when you check the thumbnail out. So, this video comes because it was recently brought to my attention that, and this was a complete shock to me, Ruby Franke, who stands accused of, I guess they call it aggravated child abuse in Utah, she was not the only YouTuber. Both, not just one, but both. I mean, I don't know how many sisters she has. Two sisters, two of Ruby Franke's sisters have YouTube channels, and they are huge. One of them has millions of subs. The other one is in the six figures, hundreds of thousands of subs. So naturally, I read through this article, and later on, I went to both of their channels, and they have two front and center videos. One of them has two. One of them has just one, immediately addressing the issue concerning their sister, Ruby Franke. And they both have a very similar message, which is that they had no idea that anything was going on because they were cut off by Ruby Franke, and that they did not agree with what they both use. Paraphrasing, they both called the practices and teachings of Jody Hildebrand to, they called them weird practices. They did not agree with them. They were weird to them. And somehow, some way, because of that, Ruby Franke disconnected from them, and they had not only no idea that the kids were being abused, but they also had no contact with her at all. So they're basically trying to, in my opinion, respond to what is likely an overwhelming amount of incoming messages from people who are very critical of these two sisters for not doing something to protect the kids. And my understanding, by the way, is that one of the people who was calling CPS on, or the authorities, I don't know if it was police and or CPS, on Ruby Franke was her own daughter, I guess her adult daughter. There's articles that discuss this, that her name is Sherry Franke, and she was worried for her siblings. So what I'm picturing here is an adult daughter who's moved out, has her own place, and is worried about the other kids, her other siblings that are still minors and still under the custody and control of Ruby Franke. So I guess all I can really say here is the societal expectation is somewhat consistent with the court's expectation here on when and who should get involved in protecting children. They do have the CPS system that is there, but as I have mentioned in my other videos, abuse and neglect proceedings and collateral attacks, I've mentioned in other videos that, in my personal opinion, based on how I see CPS treat cases and based on how I see the court treat people who call CPS, from these observations, which many people I'm sure will disagree with, CPS is and should be called by non-family members. That's just my opinion. You know, the closer you are to the core family, the less, in my opinion, you should be using CPS. And that's because when I went through court, a lot of times CPS had this attitude that when a mom or dad was calling them, they just wanted a leg up in their custody case. And they probably had to wade through a whole lot of lies in those situations. Whereas if it's a teacher or a doctor or a neighbor or somebody who's disconnected from the family calling them, it's more likely to be a legitimate use of CPS to protect kids. It gets a little bit murky when you go beyond the core family, you know, mom and dad, but you're not quite at the level of strangers. So grandparents and aunts and cousins, and like there is, you know, fuzziness there. And I think a lot of times it has to do less with protecting the kids and it has to do more with being afraid to get involved in somebody else's parenting. That is a huge thing. I mean, I don't know about other countries, but in this country, you do not get involved in other people's parenting. You could get screamed at. You could get, I mean, it's a bad idea. I mean, even like grandparents can get away with it more because they parent the parent. But even in those situations, they could get yelled at. They could get cut off. I mean, some people will not tolerate any advice or feedback at all unless they ask for it. And there's no exemption for things that look like abuse. You know, somebody in the store looks like they're abusing their kids and a stranger goes up to them. They could very well pop off in the store And there's just this sort of unspoken thing that you just don't get involved in other people's parenting. And in a lot of families, that applies to each other, even though society has, I think, more of a reasonable expectation that families police themselves before the authorities and outsiders do so. It's just not, it's just so, it's a touchy subject, and I think more people should talk about it. But no matter what the reality is about getting involved in other people's parenting, no matter what the reality is, there's an even worse sort of societal or cultural reaction to telling on your own family members than there is to why didn't you protect them? Why didn't you protect those kids that were being abused? I mean, they're both out there. Like, there's this sort of societal, like, you had to have known those kids were being abused, and you're also evil for not, going after your own daughter or whatever to protect those kids. But there's this other side of, I can't believe you tattled on your own kids and now they're in jail or losing, not only just reporting your own family to the police, but reporting your own family to CPS. It's just like a thing that people overwhelmingly do not want to do, that I would go ahead and use the word terrified to say. I mean, they're terrified of doing that because of who knows what'll happen in their family if they get found out. And so sometimes I think that is a bigger part of why family members use CPS than anything else, is that they want to tell on their own family anonymously and not get in trouble by their own family. They're less concerned about the police. They're less concerned about the kids being abused. They're more concerned about being found out as a person who tattled on their own family member. So, like, this is the situation I think that's cooking up right now with the Franke sisters. And I don't know necessarily that they have any kind of out when you think of, like, hindsight is 2020. So, like, yeah, if they could go back in time, now that they know what the outcome was going to be, they probably would have taken a more aggressive approach. They may have even instituted proceedings of their own to take those kids, which is something that can be done. And that, obviously, in this particular situation, had they done that, I highly doubt anyone would have thought that they were in the wrong for doing it. But hindsight is 2020. And they're in the situation that they are now because they followed their instincts back then, which was to just stay out of it. Their sister cut them off. They didn't have any idea, or at least they had plausible deniability because they had been cut off. And now that they're being criticized, they are feeling probably very frustrated because they probably don't think that they've done anything wrong. Whereas the people who are angry at them think otherwise. And like I told you guys, it's just these competing societal expectations that are not consistent and create these situations where people feel like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Ultimately, it's one of those situations that is very unforgiving to this principle of that you just have to be right. If you're not right, you get just screamed at. And if you report someone to CPS and you are found out to have been wrong, you get screamed at because you subjected them to the government's proceedings and ultimately you were wrong. And of course, if you don't do that, if you don't report them, and then they end up actually having been abusing the kids, then you were wrong for not reporting them, and society screams at you. So when it comes to people's kids and child abuse, everybody cares a whole lot about it, and they care so much about it that they expect you to be exactly right all the time, or they'll blow up on you. So I don't know that I have any sympathy for the family, and unfortunately, I can't say that, like, my opinion is mainstream. Most of the time, my opinion is not mainstream when it comes to family court because I represented myself for 8 years. And so it's sometimes difficult for me to relate to people who have no clue because I have a lot of clue. I have a lot of clue with not only how family court works, but also what you can accomplish. You can accomplish a lot. And I understand that most people are very afraid of it and they don't have as much experience. And so my opinion personally does not often connect with the opinion of people who just haven't been through family court and are afraid of it. And so my opinion, I guess I'll just tell you guys now since I'm talking about it so much, is that they should have done something a lot sooner. I think that they probably, having, heard the teachings of Hildebrand, they were apparently very aware of those teachings because they both spent a lot of time saying that they did not agree with Hildebrand. They thought she was weird. that should have been a red flag, or at least a yellow flag, that they should have been paying more attention. Um, I guess I would have been understanding if they would have used CPS, but I think in this particular situation, they both have huge YouTube channels. They're both probably making a lot of money, and they both probably could have afforded to litigate the issue to protect those kids. And I think that if they would have done so, they would have been in the right. And that this is a situation where clearly the kids were not just being abused, but they were almost gloating about it. So like I'm not going to go into this too much. Of what I would instead do is direct you guys to some of the documentaries that are going on right now. I mean, the case is still ongoing, but there are quite a few videos on YouTube that are hour plus long that go into some of the details. And apparently not all of the abuse was hidden. Like Sherry Franke, or sorry, that's the daughter. Ruby Franke would send the kids to school with no food, or there was like a dispute about that, actually, about the child saying that she did have food, but in actuality she didn't, and how she was proud about sticking to her guns and saying no lunch for her. There was stuff with a child who I guess wasn't given a room or something. And apparently these videos that were being published on YouTube, and these interactions even in real life, like with churchgoers and stuff, like people were aware, like they didn't hide everything. People were aware, and it's just very difficult for me to believe that the family did not know anything was going on because of those videos, and even more so that they were not empowered to have been able to on their own get involved and protect those kids, considering the fact that they both had very large YouTube channels and that they would have had the money to litigate it. I guess some people might disagree with me. They might say, well, that's not their kids, so okay, you can say that, but the second that CPS gets involved and tries to take somebody's kid, probably 99% of people will expect those kids to go to an aunt or something. So there's a disconnect here with what, with sort of, I guess, responsibility to do something when it concerns your family versus the actual scary part of getting involved in the court system. And that's where I think this discomfort comes from, when it comes to somebody having to take the step to get involved in the court system, because of how much uncertainty and fear and ignorance most people have towards it. Circles me back to the beginning of, I don't have those fears anymore because I went through it for 8 years. Anyway, guys, if you have any questions about this topic, feel free to post it down in the comments below, or if you have any opinions of your own. And I will see you guys next time.